Hi guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Ria, and today we're going to dive deep into a case study. We're going to dissect the birth chart of a serial killer. And today's case study subject is Edmund Kemper. Now, he was a prolific serial killer in the 70s, and he committed unspeakable crimes, like horrific crimes. And what we're going to try to figure out is what planetary placements, what indications in his birth chart shows such a violent nature and such rage inside of him. Could an astrologer have predicted that this individual would have committed all these horrendous crimes? Also, I'm going to analyze not only his birth chart, but the planetary transits that were happening during key event dates, during his first murders and during his killing sprees, and all the way until the end of his life as a serial killer. Before I get into it, I just want to remind you, if you want to learn more about my work or book a consultation, you can do so through my website that is linked in the description. And if you're new to this channel, feel free to subscribe. And I also want to mention that I use sidereal astrology, and Vedic astrology is not the same as tropical Western astrology. We use different techniques. There are very advanced prediction techniques. And if you come from a Western astrology background, just know that the charts will differ. So Edmund Kemper started exhibiting antisocial and serial killer behavior since he was about 12 years old. Now, he was killing cats and dismembering them, and he had a very rough childhood. Now, if you look at his chart, at first sight, you can see that he's got 4 planets in Sagittarius in the 5th house. Now, this can be confusing because at first you might think, well, Sagittarius is the sign of philosophy, higher morals, of wisdom, of religion, spirituality. So this is contradictory, right? Wrong. Because 2 of these planets are in Mula Nakshatra. The Sun and Mercury are in Mula Nakshatra. Mula Nakshatra is one of the most difficult nakshatras. It's about destruction. It's about transformation. The purpose of this nakshatra is destruction to reach enlightenment. And these people go through transformations and very difficult experiences in order to reach enlightenment. And not everyone will pass the test and reach enlightenment. Just like some people who go through suffering, they become more compassionate as a result of that, and they dedicate their lives to helping others who are going through the same thing, right? These people obviously pass the tests, but other people like Edmund Kemper just choose to become that same destructive force that destroyed them. And this is what happened in this case. So we have to look at the nuances and both sides of the nakshatras when we read a birth chart. Now, in Vedic astrology, the moon represents our mind, and it also represents our mother. And the first thing we can see is that the moon is in the 12th house, the 12th from the ascendant. So it is the house furthest away from the self, and this house indicates losses. So we can see that there is a sense of loss with his mother. There is an emotional distance between him and his mother. Now, this could mean many different things depending on the chart. Sometimes certain people can just live in foreign lands and be physically distanced from their mother, but they could have wonderful mothers. But in this case, it takes a whole different signification. Once we get more into it, you'll see. He had a domineering, abusive, neurotic mother who constantly belittled him and humiliated him. She would torture him, and she would lock him in the basement for him to sleep there all night with rats, and she would never show him affection for fear that he would become gay, in her own words. And she always told him that no woman could ever love him because he reminded her so much of his father, of her ex-husband. And so she hated her ex-husband, and as a result she hated her son. But looking at his birth chart, what could explain such cruelty coming from his mother? Because the moon is in Cancer, so it is in good dignity. You know, just the fact that it's in the 12th house is not enough of an indication to show such extreme cruelty towards her child. But if you notice, moon is with Pluto. Pluto is a destructive force, and moon is being aspected by Mars's 8th aspect, which is Mars's most difficult and destructive aspect. So even if the moon is in good dignity, it cannot withstand the two malefic forces, the two strong destructive forces from Pluto and Mars. So in Vedic astrology, the moon is the most fragile planet because the moon is very receptive energy. And the moon does not impact other planets, but it does get fully impacted by other planets. So Mars's aspect on the moon and the conjunction with Pluto really have a destructive force on the moon that even a moon in good dignity cannot withstand. Plus, combined with all the other aspects in his chart that we will cover, it will all make sense. Because in astrology, everything is an addition. We cannot look at aspects in isolation. Everything adds up. We have to look at the chart as a whole. So the first significator of the mother is the moon. Now the second significator is the 4th house. And his 4th house is in Scorpio. Wherever the Scorpio sign falls in our charts is where we have some karma, is where we will have ups and downs. But now, not all Leo ascendants will have a horrible mother and an abusive mother. In general, Leo ascendants have a karmic relationship with their mother because the 4th house falls into Scorpio. Now, karmic relationship can mean many different things. They could have a wonderful mother, but they could both have issues that can be worked out or cannot be worked out, depending on many different factors. But in Kemper's case, it was extreme. Scorpio energy is just like the 8th house energy. It's unpredictable. It is extremes. 8th house is sudden changes. A sudden change can be winning the lottery or getting into an accident. So it is a very unpredictable energy. It is the extremes. It is the ups and downs. But in Kemper's case, it was the extreme dark side. It was horrific. It was a relationship completely devoid of any love. And look at Venus. Venus is the planet of love. So when we look at Venus, it can tell us a lot. Now, Venus represents women, it represents happiness, and it represents love. And Venus is in Papkartri Yoga. Papkartri Yoga in Vedic astrology is when a planet is hemmed between two or more malefics on each side. And Venus is hemmed between Ketu and Sun and Mars from each side. So Papkartri Yoga means scissors. And this yoga acts like scissors because it completely cuts off all of the significances of that planet. So we could see he had major issues with women in his life that led him to become a serial killer and to target other women because of his hatred towards women. And Venus also represents love and happiness, and he was completely devoid of these things. He never knew love. He was abandoned by his father and tortured by his mother and his grandmother. So we can really see the effects of that yoga. Venus could not function in his chart. And not only that, but Venus is in Anuradha Nakshatra. And Anuradha Nakshatra in and of itself indicates issues with the mother and intense emotions. So we have 3 strong indications of extreme issues surrounding the motherly figures in his life, the woman, and combined with the moon being impacted by malefics. This concoction created a disastrous childhood for this individual that would fester inside of him and make him become a monster. Not only did he have major issues surrounding women, but he also had internal battles that went deep. So if you look at his ascendant, his first house, he's a Leo ascendant. His ascendant is in Magha. Magha is the nakshatra of royalty. These people have a deep need for recognition. They just want to be validated. Their egos are very prominent. This nakshatra is known for that. And Leo is ruled by the sun. Now, he's got Saturn in retrograde on his ascendant. And Saturn in retrograde on the ascendant is a lot of Saturn. That's heavy Saturnian energy. And Sun and Saturn are enemies. So we can see this internal battle inside of him because the Sun wants to empower you through your ego, through boosting your sense of self. And Saturn on the ascendant kills the ego. Saturn wants to empower you by destroying your ego. So they have 2 very different philosophies. This is why they are the biggest enemies in Vedic astrology. And so this internal battle is happening on his ascendant. It is the most personal house out of all 12 houses because it represents the self. So he was deeply conflicted. And Saturn always has the last say. So Saturn on the ascendant will destroy the ego. Now it's up to the person what they want to do with it. But him being Magha ascendant and Rahu in Aries Ashwini, those are energies that are all about the ego. So Magha ascendants, especially when it's paired with Rahu and Ashwini, cannot live without their ego. So he was in a constant battle, and the more you fight Saturn, the more difficult it's going to be. Now, even a Saturn in good dignity is difficult and harsh, but ultimately it can lead to humility, compassion, maturity. But here Saturn is in an enemy sign in bad dignity on his ascendant. And he's got a lot of fiery energy with Rahu in Aries and his ascendant in Leo. So he was a very conflicted individual. Now, he committed his first murder at only 15 years old. It was August 27th, 1964. And on that day, Sun, Mercury, and Pluto were transiting over his ascendant, over his natal Saturn. And Saturn was in Aquarius, aspecting the Sun, his natal Rahu, his ascendant, his natal Saturn, and his natal Venus. So that's a lot of Saturnian energy. Now, Saturn aspecting his natal Saturn on his ascendant is in and of itself a lot of Saturnian energy to deal with, and it can be very harsh. But on that day, it was also aspecting the Sun, his biggest enemy, which activated this internal battle that was already inside of him. And the moon was transiting his 8th house, a dastana house and a house of sudden events. And his moon is already in bad shape. Venus, Mars, and Rahu were conjunct in Gemini, aspecting his 5th house. So it was aspecting 4 of his natal planets, 2 of which are in Mula Nakshatra, the nakshatra of destruction. And Mars being with Rahu in and of itself is like a ticking time bomb. It is an explosive energy, highly unpredictable. Plus, Mars aspecting Mercury is always difficult due to Mars and Mercury being also great enemies. So this was what was happening with the planet, and on that day he killed his grandmother, and then he later killed his grandfather. And the reason he gave for killing his grandfather was so that he would not have to see that his wife was dead. But he really wanted to kill his grandmother. He had such a hatred towards women, and his grandmother was also very abusive towards him, just like his mother. So he started by killing his grandparents, and on the same day he turned himself in, and he stayed imprisoned until 18 December 1969. Now, on the day that he got released, Rahu and Mars were in Aquarius, aspecting his natal Ketu, and Jupiter was in Libra, transiting over his natal Ketu. Now we've got 3 malefics involved, and Rahu Ketu axis got activated. This is highly karmic. Saturn was debilitated in Aries, transiting over his natal Rahu and aspecting the Sun. Again, we have 3 malefics involved, and Saturn, Sun being enemies in an aspect. And Venus was in Scorpio, transiting over his natal Venus, that is so afflicted in Papkatri Yoga. So this was the final hit. That combination of transits really showed a karmic event. But it is the day he got free, but the day that he got released was not a good day for him, was not a lucky day by any means, because it would only mean that he would go back to his mother's place to continue enduring the torture. And a few years later is when his killing spree started. Now, Kemper performed unspeakable crimes that I cannot even describe on YouTube. So if you want to know the details, I have linked my blog in the description down below where I explain this in further detail. But I'm going to spare you the graphics because it is unthinkable, it is unspeakable. So anyway, long story short, he would pick up hitchhiking female students and he would kill them, and then he would do very deranged things. So his killing spree was between May 1972 until the 20th of April 1973, and this was at the very end of his Mercury Mahadasha, during his Mercury Saturn Dasha, and throughout his Ketu Dasha. Now Ketu is headless. Anytime anyone goes through Rahu or Ketu Dashas, it can indicate confusion and not thinking clearly. But it doesn't mean that people going through Rahu or Ketu Mahadasha will go on a killing spree. It just means that it was a headless time for him. Now, on what level? That's where we can see it in his chart. Because Ketu's dispositor is Venus. And Venus is in Papkatri Yoga, being hemmed in between 2 malefics. And this is why it took such a dark turn. And not only that, but Ketu is in Libra. Now people tend to think of Libra as a fun and light sign because it's ruled by Venus. But in actuality, Libra can be as difficult and karmic as Scorpio. Libra, Aquarius, Scorpio, and Pisces are 4 difficult signs. Wherever these 4 signs falls into our chart, that is the house where we will have certain issues. And I will dive deeper into it in another video. But his ketu is in bad shape and it's being aspected by Saturn. So his ketu dasha was really a dark period. Now his killing spree ended with the murder of his mother. He realized that he was killing all these women because they reminded him of his mother. So he decided that he was going to put an end to it and kill his mother. So the day he killed his mother is when he turned himself in. Now what's interesting is looking at the transits, we can see why his mother died on that day. Now Mars and Jupiter were in Capricorn, transiting over his 6th house. Now the 6th house is a makara house for his mother because it is the 7th from his moon. Now in Vedic astrology, makara means killer. So the 2nd house and the 7th house are killer houses. So the 7th from the moon means death of his mother because the moon is the karka for mother. And 2 planets were transiting his mother's makara house. And Saturn is also a makara planet for his mother because it is 2nd from the moon. And on that day, Saturn was in Taurus, aspecting the moon and the 4th house. And the 4th house and the moon both represent the mother. So both makara houses got activated, and we've got malefics involved as well with Saturn and Mars. So on that day, this was the culmination of his rage, and he did unspeakable things to his mother's corpse when he killed her. But that was also the end of his life as a serial killer. And what's interesting is that his makara houses also got activated, and it was a metaphorical death for him because he turned himself in and he went to jail and he refused parole. He wanted to stay in jail because he did not know how he would react if he was free and he would see a woman who would remind him of his mother. Now Saturn is also Kemper's makara planet because it rules his 7th house, and Mercury is his other makara planet because it rules his 2nd house. And on that day that he turned himself in, Mercury was transiting his 8th house of death and sudden changes. And Saturn was aspecting his 7th house, a makara house. So we've got 2 makara planets involved, the 8th house, a dastana house, and a makara house involved. Now that does not mean he died, but his life had a metaphorical death. It was the end. And the 8th house brings major transformations. On that day, his life completely transformed. And what's interesting, and I'm going to close on that note, is that his moon being in the 12th house shows that he only found peace when he was in jail throughout his life. And we can see that when reading his story throughout his life. The only time he had a life that was remotely normal was when he was in jail. The only time he was not dealing with chaotic energies was when he was imprisoned. And wherever the moon sits in our chart is where we find our peace. So the 12th house represents jails, asylums, hospitals, represents isolation from society. And his moon being in the 12th house found peace in jails. And this is how his story ended. And he even asked for the death sentence by torture. He probably could not live with himself. So that was it. I hope that this was helpful and helped you understand how we can tie all different aspects together when we read a birth chart and how we can interpret transits. And if you got value from this, like this video and subscribe for more upcoming case studies. I'll see you in the next video. Take care.